So the title of this panel is Future Scenarios, Energy and Economy. And I want to frame this discussion around those ideas and give you a sense of what it is that we'll be talking about. I'm going to start with scenarios. What are scenarios, as we'll be talking about them today? Scenarios have been called memories of the future or myths of the future. Scenarios guru Peter Schwartz calls them ways to dream effectively about the future. Schwartz stresses that scenarios are not predictions. Rather, they are sets of stories on how to re-perceive the present in ways that prepare us for multiple possible futures. Essentially, scenarios ask the question, what if? And then they extrapolate from the answers to that question where different paths might head. Scenarios first emerged after World War II as a method for military planning, but it was really Shell in the 1970s when it launched its group planning unit that raised scenarios to an art form, including their famous forecasting of the 1973 oil embargo, which caught many other energy companies flat-footed, but Shell was both logistically and emotionally prepared for that big of a transition. More recently, late last year, Shell launched its Energy Scenarios to 2050, its most recent iteration of this scenarios exercise. And in it they say, never before has humanity faced such a challenging outlook for energy and the planet. And I would submit that that might even be an understatement. They sum up the report in 5 words: more energy, less carbon dioxide. The next component of our title is energy and economy. And seeing as this is an event happening at Audubon, we presume the presence of environment in this equation. So it's really energy and economy and environment, and you'll be hearing more about that particular intersection from Chris Martenson when he talks about the 3 E's, as he calls them. Energy is underneath, it is embedded in every economic activity, or almost all of them. And I want to have you think visually about where we are right now. We live in an industrial capitalist society where economy is predicated on a constant growth upward. Okay, so when you look at the charts, you're looking to see upward growth in an economy. Energy follows suit. You have upward demand that's related to upward supply. This is all good in theory. Most of our energy, as we know, comes from fossil sources. And so that upward trend also has embedded in it rising carbon and greenhouse gas emissions, which subsequently has raising climate change impacts. Okay, so we have a number of things that are climbing upward, and we have been taught that this is good to have this constant upward trending. We also live in a world of constraints, in a world of limitations, and that notion was first famously introduced in 1972 with the Club of Rome report, Limits to Growth. And also in the 1950s, there was predicted limits of our main source of energy of fossil fuel, oil, by Hubbard, predicting Hubbard's peak, accurately predicting the peak of oil production in the United States in the 1970s, and we have yet to see whether his prediction of a peak of oil globally in the first decade of the 2000s will turn out to be true in hindsight. Some people think that we're already there, some people think that it may be in the future. what that leads toward is a decline in oil production. We also have a decline in the availability of many of the resources that we use and take for granted. The computers and iPhones that we have are not only using energy, but they also use other resources that are depleting as oil is. And so when you have these upward curves meeting downward curves, we're moving to a place of a wedge. And that's where we are right now. We're in a wedge, or as Carl Henrik Robert, who is the originator of the natural step, he visualizes this confluence as a funnel that we will be going through that will winnow out what could be called unsustainable practices. I'm going to end with laying out a series of different future scenarios. So I borrowed this term, future scenarios, from David Holmgren, who is a co-originator of permaculture. And he has a book out right now that you can get called Future Scenarios: How Communities Can Adapt to Peak Oil and Climate Change. He presents 4 broad energy scenarios. So he sees one possibility is what he calls techno-explosion. So techno-explosion is where things continue upward and technology comes in to solve any problems that are created through that. The other is techno-stability, where technology comes in and keeps us where we are right now, at our level of creature comforts, at our level of energy consumption. So primarily through renewable energy would be the icon that we'd associate with techno-stability. Finally, next is energy descent, where we have a descending amount of overall energy available to us as a society, a global society, and therefore we experience a downturn in the kinds of economic activity that we have done up until this point, that we've gotten used to. Also, a descent in fossil fuels and the kinds of social complexity that fossil fuels have allowed us to enjoy. And his final is collapse, which is the very dire scenario, which, as we look at climate change and see the kinds of negotiations that are going into Copenhagen, that is a scenario that bears consideration. Holmgren throws his weight to the energy descent scenario. He says there's a desperate need to recast energy descent as a positive process that can free people from the strictures and dysfunctions of growth economies and consumer culture. And he creates a matrix of 4 possible energy descent scenarios. So within one scenario, he breaks it down into 4 other ones. So the takeaway for me in this is that there's a really broad spectrum of possible scenarios for the future. And the point is not to necessarily say, this is the one that's going to happen. The point is to contemplate all of these possibilities and figure out how can we best use our actions in the present to prepare for the future possibilities.